All right, let's dive into a fantastic cosmic mystery. I mean, how did an ancient civilization with zero telescopes or computers manage to predict solar eclipses with almost perfect accuracy? We're going to crack the code on the absolutely brilliant astronomical methods of the Maya. But first, to really get what they accomplished, we have to kind of travel back in time. We need to imagine what an eclipse actually felt like before we had any science to explain it.
No, seriously, just think about that for a second. You're out in a field, it's midday, bright and sunny, and all of a sudden the sky goes dark. The sun is just gone. Can you imagine that primal fear? You'd think it was the end of the world, right?
And that's the huge difference. For us, today, an eclipse is a pretty cool event. You know, we get an alert on our phones, we buy some funny-looking glasses. But for ancient people, it was terrifying. They literally believed that mythological creatures were eating the sun. This wasn't just something to watch. It was an event that demanded a response, a ritual, something.
But see, there was this one civilization that wasn't just content to be afraid. They decided they were going to understand these cosmic events. So, let's meet the Maya, the incredible sky watchers of Mesoamerica.
And we're not talking about some brief moment in history here. This was a civilization with incredibly deep roots, starting way back around 1500 BCE. And what's so important to remember is, this is not some long-lost people. Their legacy is alive and well. Over 5 million people today still speak Maya languages. By 200 CE, these guys were one of the most advanced civilizations on the entire planet. I mean, their genius was just off the charts. They built whole cities with these massive pyramids, they developed these unbelievably complex calendars, and they created one of the most sophisticated writing systems in the world.
So how in the world do we know all of this? Well, a huge piece of the puzzle is this incredible document, the Dresden Codex. It's basically a book from the 11th or 12th century, made out of tree bark. It's one of the very, very few Maya books that actually survived the Spanish conquest, and inside is their priceless knowledge of astronomy.
And inside that codex is the key, the secret to their incredible predictive power. So let's dig in and see how exactly they used it to crack the eclipse code.
So you gotta understand, predicting eclipses wasn't just some fun academic hobby. It was a spiritual and political necessity. They needed to know when these signs were coming so they could get ready with the right rituals, which were often pretty sinister, to please their gods and keep the universe in balance. Their method was just so patient and so smart. First, they just watched. Every single day, they observed the sun and the moon. Second, they started to see the patterns. They figured out that eclipses weren't random at all. They happened in cycles. And third, they wrote it all down, creating this enormous calendar that tracked lunar months. And this is the magic number they landed on. Recorded right there in the Dresden Codex, 405. They figured out this major predictive cycle that lasted 405 lunar months. The idea was pretty straightforward. You track the eclipses for that long, then you reset the table and start all over again. It should have let them predict eclipses for centuries. But there was a huge problem. When modern scientists first found this and tried to replicate the method, it didn't work. The predictions were good for a little while, but then they'd slowly drift out of sync with what was actually happening in the sky. The math just wasn't adding up. So what was the secret ingredient the Maya were using that we were missing?
Well, here's the thing. The moon's orbit isn't a perfect ticking clock. Sometimes it's a few hours longer, sometimes a few hours shorter. It's kind of like being a minute late to a meeting. You know, once is no big deal. But if you're a minute late every single day for 3 months, suddenly you're an hour and a half behind schedule. These tiny little errors were adding up and throwing the whole calendar off.
So what was their secret? What was the trick? Well, it was a correction. A correction so subtle and so unbelievably ingenious, it took modern researchers a long time to figure it out. And here's the genius part. Instead of letting the table run all the way to 405 months and then hitting reset, they made a correction early. They would reset the whole table at the 358th month. By doing that, they basically wiped out all that accumulated error before it could get big enough to mess up their predictions.
And you know, if that sounds kind of complicated, it's actually a concept we're all familiar with, the leap year. The Earth doesn't orbit the sun in exactly 365 days, right? There's about 6 extra hours. So every 4 years, we add an extra day, a leap day, to get our calendar back in sync. The Maya were doing the exact same thing for their eclipse calendar, just on a way more complex scale.
I mean, when you put it all together, the scale of what they accomplished is it's breathtaking. This was pure, unadulterated astronomical genius. Get this. With their correction system working, their predictions for when the sun and moon would line up were only off by about 2 hours and 20 minutes. That is insanely accurate. It let them correctly predict every single solar eclipse visible in their lands for 800 years. 800 years, from 350 to 1150 CE.
So what does all this tell us about them? Well, it shows they had incredibly advanced mathematics. It shows this deep, profound connection between their spiritual beliefs and the actual movements of the cosmos. And they did all of this without a single computer, without a single telescope. Just patient, brilliant observation of the world around them.
And that really just leaves you with one final thought. You know, the Maya eclipse calendar was a puzzle for centuries until we finally cracked their code. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other incredible knowledge, what other ancient wisdom is still out there just waiting for us to rediscover?